Hi everyone, my name is Matt Valenzuela, and today we're going to go over the exposure triangle. You've probably seen videos about the exposure triangle on YouTube, but I don't think they go in enough detail about the creative side of it. They really only focus on the technical end of it, and then you're left wondering, what settings do I use in what situation and where do I even start? Your settings are more than a technical decision, it's also a creative decision. So stick with me, and by the end of the video, you're gonna be more purposeful in choosing those settings in a given situation. Your shutter speed controls the amount of time light is allowed to hit the sensor. Your aperture is the amount of light that is allowed to hit the sensor, and your ISO controls how sensitive your sensor is going to be to light in a given situation. One thing to remember about the exposure triangle is if you move one setting, the others have to change and compensate. So there's always that push and pull and compromise sometimes when you're adjusting your settings. If you slow your shutter down to achieve, say, a blurry water look, you're probably gonna have to darken up the image by lowering your ISO or stopping down on your aperture. Another example is taking your aperture, moving it wide open to get that blurry background. If you do that, then you're gonna have to either adjust your shutter speed, your ISO, or maybe both to get the proper exposure. Again, I really wanna emphasize, if you're moving one end of that triangle, you're probably gonna have to adjust the other two accordingly. Okay, let's jump into a couple of examples and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. When I was planning this particular shot, I knew that I wanted the background to be blurry and the model to actually stand out from the background. Because I wanted the model to stand out from the background, I knew I had to shoot with a wide open aperture. That day it was really sunny outside, so I knew I had to have a faster shutter speed to cut out some of the light. This shot would have been completely different if I used a smaller aperture. There would have been less separation from the background, and the focus wouldn't be on the model like I had intended. Going back to that concept of using our creativity to choose our settings intentionally, the shot would have been completely different if I had a smaller aperture versus a larger aperture. That background would have been a lot more in focus and the model would have not stood out as much. To answer the question of what settings am I supposed to use in any given situation, prioritize it. So look at what do you want to achieve as far as a look. We know that we wanted to get that blurry, creamy background, so aperture is going to have to get set first. Going back to the exposure triangle, we know the other two legs of that triangle are going to have to move and shift according to what I want to set for my aperture. Here's another example of how I used my aperture to make a very purposeful decision on the depth of field. I used a smaller aperture to make sure that the foreground and the background were both in focus. I wanted the whole picture to be emphasized, that everything was crystal clear. On another note, your gear choice is another purposeful decision. In this photo, I used a telephoto lens to make sure that compression was happening because I wanted that proximity of the two people in the front with that truck in the background. If I used a wider angle lens, that distance would have been way exaggerated. Because I used a telephoto, it was compressed, and I wanted that proximity to kind of get that feeling of like it was happening right there, like the truck was just overbearing and is right there in front of their faces, and that sense of urgency just like all played out perfectly in how the image ended up coming out. Here's a picture that I shot in Iceland. You'll note that the water is blurred on the waterfall. This was a conscious decision and purposeful creative decision I used with my shutter. I used a slower shutter speed, and thinking back to our exposure triangle, if I slow down my shutter, I'm gonna have to adjust both my ISO and aperture to compensate and make sure I get a good exposure. This is a photo of the Summer Palace in St. Petersburg. You'll note that the water in the picture is actually frozen. I didn't use a slower shutter speed to blur everything. My main focus was to have everything in focus from foreground to background and just get that whole entire stretch. The most important takeaway I want you to have from this video is be purposeful. Make the decision before you even pick up your camera what you want to accomplish in your image. I hope you found this video super helpful. I'm gonna try to tailor this content to be a little bit different than other stuff that you're gonna find on YouTube. I'm gonna have that kind of deeper level of information in there rather than just keep it technical. And hopefully you guys can get a lot of value out of it. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Any feedback would be great. Anything that you guys want to learn or you want me to do a video on, just let me know. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you get notified when I post a new video.